And to review progress made by Nigeria in the ease of doing business, we have in the studio Mrs. Toyin Bashir. She is Head Legal Cluster, Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBIC. Madam, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy
Thank
to
you
be
for
here.
coming. And from the same office is David Uzosike. He is a reform lead of PEBIC. David, it's good to have you here this morning.
And we also have in the studio Professor Uche Waleke, Professor of Capital Market, and he's also Chief Economist, Securities and Exchange Commission in Abuja. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
And in our Kaduna Network Center, we have Dr. Yushua Ango, Associate Professor of Business Entrepreneurship and Director Academics and Planning, Kaduna State University. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, thank you from Kaduna. Gentlemen and lady, it's glad to have you here this morning for us to take a look at this very, very crucial aspect of development plan, generally speaking. And on July 2016, that was when the federal government inaugurated the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, of course, as a flagship initiative to reform the business environment in Nigeria. But I'd like to ask Toyin Bashir to give us a background of this council and its modus operandi, in terms of functionality.
Okay, thank you so much. Like you rightly mentioned, in response to the federal government's assessment of the business climate when, of course, the administration began, the President Muhammad Buhari, set up the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council to remove bureaucratic bottlenecks in the business climate. The current chair of PEBIC is His Excellency, the Vice President of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, SAN, GCON. The Vice Chair of the Council is Ms. Dr. Enelama, the Honorable Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment. And essentially on the council, we also have key ministers who are related, who their portfolio relates to the business environment, who sits on the council, as well as the CBN governor. We also have the head of service because, the interventions relate to people in the service. So we have the head of service who also sits on the council and a member of the private sector. We also have representatives of Lagos State and Kano State governments who sit on the council. So the council meets on a monthly basis basically to review issues which affect the Nigerian business climate. It's supported by a secretariat, the Enabling Business Environment Secretariat. This is where myself and David Uzosike work. The coordinator of the secretariat is the Senior Special Assistant to the President, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole. So the secretariat essentially works with different ministries, departments, and agencies together with the private sector because, of course, that a lot of this affects the private sector directly to understand the issues. And then once these issues are agreed, essentially through targeted interventions like our national action plans is devolved and the issues are addressed. So the council meets on a monthly basis to review what has been done and then approve the national action plans.
Thank you so much. Mr. David, can you give us an assessment of the ease of doing business and how it has changed the lives of the ordinary Nigerian?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Essentially, it's about 3 years on now since the council was inaugurated and we've been carrying out the interventions. So far, there's been over 140 reforms that have been implemented across various sectors. And of course, the interventions have to do with the lifespan of a business, from starting a business, paying taxes, getting electricity, registering property, and getting credits. About 10 indicator areas, including homegrown indicators, which is the trading within Nigeria, entry and exit of people. So essentially, we've done a lot, like Mrs. Bashir mentioned. We collaborate and, have engagements with stakeholders in the private sector, the MDAs, to determine what interventions to focus on. in each of these indicator areas, and then work on the interventions and implement across board. Again, the interventions are actually led by the agencies. So the interventions sit with the respective agencies that are involved in that particular sector. So that's to institutionalize the interventions so that the agencies own it and continue to drive it. So the model is to sift through the various issues that affect businesses, determine what the priorities to focus on are. For example, starting a business, we're able to automate that process. So you can actually get your business registered within 24 hours now. For paying taxes, there's been automation of the e-filing process. So taxpayers can file their taxes, pay for their taxes from anywhere in the world. Under entry and exit of people, you mentioned the visa on arrival during the introductory video. That happens within 48 hours. In fact, recently, it's been upgraded to a web-based visa where you don't have to send an email. You fill the form directly on the portal, you make your payment, and then you get your approval within 48 hours, and then the visitor can come in and get the visa issued at the point of entry. So several interventions across the various indicators have been implemented, and I can say that the impact have been very, very good. And the feedback from private sector is also very, very positive. Last year, we had a private sector firm carry out an impact assessment, and the feedback was really, really impressive. There have been several improvements across the various indicators. For example, you have about 670 billion naira worth of financing statements registered on the National Collateral Registry. That's about 35,000 statements have been registered on the platform. And the National Collateral Registry is where you have people, log in their movable assets so that they can then use that to get loans instead of the traditional fixed assets. So a lot has happened in the various sectors depending on where the business sits.
Okay, sorry, Jume, good analysis, yes. Of course you lead when it comes to the reform, but in the course of the program, we'll go to some specifics, for us to determine how what we have done has been cascaded down to all categories of business. But for now, let's go to Uche Owaleke. Uche, one of the issues, considered on the World Bank doing business ranking is whether the achievements recorded translated to real benefits to the small business owners who have to contend with so many issues like the energy generation, taxes, and other regulatory, functions of so many agencies that have to pass through. Right now, what is your take, on what has been recorded so far?
Yes, I think objectively speaking, a lot has been achieved since the setting up of PBEC in 2016, and particularly so since the Executive Order 001, came into force in 2017. And the one way to measure that, again, is to also hear from an unbiased person, and that unbiased person, in my view, is the World Bank ranking. The World Bank 2019 doing business report, which of course has to do with events up to May 2018. Okay, it's clear that if you take between 2016 and 2018, okay, the country moved up 23 places. Between 2016 and 2017, we moved up to 24 places. Okay, now we are 145. In 2016, we were 169. So I think that's a record improvement across all the pillars, the 10 pillars, whether in the area of starting a business or registering property, particularly in Lagos and Kano, of course, for obvious reasons, because these are the two states that the World Bank focuses on. And including, just as he also mentioned, access to credit, even though we still need to do much more in that area. The Collateral Registry, Act, has done a lot in improving access to credit. There's also the issue of access to electricity. Interesting, if you look at that report, the 2019 report, okay, it says we moved up in about 5 areas. There are 10 indicators, moved up in 5. And out of that 5, we moved up 10 places, which is the highest in with respect to paying taxes. Okay, and he alluded to it, why that was possible. The automation, the process that has happened, particularly, implemented by the FIRS, of course, with the support of PBEC. So if you take all of them, you will notice significant improvements from 2006. Of course, there's no doubt that there are also aspects that we also need to continue to work on, particularly the issue of infrastructure. You see, the World Bank has 10 indicators, but again, if you take that of Forbes Business Magazine US, of course it added some other indicators, one of which is corruption, which of course the government is currently working on. And there's also the issue of the workforce, okay, that the Forbes also added. So you have corruption, you have workforce, and you also have even stock market performance, how the stock market is performing. Of course, if the stock market is performing well, that will also be a boost to businesses setting up, and also be an incentive even for them to come and list on the exchange, which is why we're happy that the environment is now such that companies like MTN are thinking of coming to list. So I think overall, if you look at developments from 2016, till now, when PBEC was set up, a lot of achievements, have been made.
Thank you, Professor Uche. We'll be going now to our Kaduna Network Center, where Dr. Joshua Ango is waiting. Joshua Ango is waiting. Nigeria dropped 145 to 146 in 2018, according to the World Bank rating. What actually went wrong?
I don't think it is a matter of something going wrong, but I think now that we have started to get our acts right, at least jumping many places to 145, the fact that we have had this small drop is a wake-up call, in my opinion. What it means, basically, is that we have done quite a number of things right. We have started right, but then what we need to do, especially with the council, is to ensure that we benchmark ourselves as a country with the best that there is, since we have at least an opportunity to look at the ranking and to see the basis based on the 10 points identified. I think the council now needs to sit up. We are doing well on 5 out of the 10. We need to do more, and we need to benchmark ourselves against the best in the world. I think that's basically what we have to do. And what we have achieved is also one interesting thing is that, it's a complete package that we're doing. We're trying to transform the economy, to change the economy from dependence on only oil. We're trying to improve so many other aspects, like has been stated earlier. The ease of registering businesses, the payment of taxes, visibility. One other thing we need to do is that while the World Bank was looking at Kano and Lagos, it has started looking at other states, and we have seen that quite a number of states, like Kaduna State, for example, have done quite a number of reforms. And I think what the council need to do is to involve other states, not just Kaduna, not only Lagos and Kano, but involve other states to ensure that every state also transforms, make the necessary amendments to their laws pertaining to ownership of property, ease of registration of property, ease of starting a business, removal of multiple taxation, unnecessary multiple taxations and all that. So I think we need to now carry every state, not just Lagos and Kano.
Right. We'll remain with you, Dr. Ango. You are the Associate Professor of Business Entrepreneurship and Director of Academic Planning of the Kaduna State University. Empirical research is no doubt required to establish any optimal level of business regulation. For instance, what is the duration of court processes? What should be the duration of court processes? What should be the right tax, to place on a particular business, what time does it take for one to get his authorization to begin a business in our CAC, that's the Corporate Affairs Commission? What does it take for a business, a small business operator, energize his business in terms of sourcing power? So these are certain intricacies I would like you to look at, because of course we have been ranked. Perhaps the council is celebrating the ranking, but we are thinking of how the ordinary businessman on the street, the vulcanizers, and the rest of them, how are they feeling it? Has it impacted on this category of a business community?
It probably is impacting on them, but it's not impacting enough. I think there is a need to even mobilize everybody. If you go to Bahrain, they have a slogan. They said the country is referred to as business-friendly Bahrain, meaning that there is an understanding that everybody in the country is trying to support the aspect of business friendliness. The story of United Arab Emirates is known to everybody, so there is need to actually carry everybody along. And now that you have said there is also the issue of research, I also will want to implore on the relevant authorities to make use of research, to actually research these things. Research is not just for theory, it's actually useful for developmental purposes, especially in this case. So like you said, yes, it's right. We need to study, we need to find out what is the experience of these small and micro-level businesses. Do they even know about all these things? What are they getting? From time to time, we need to gauge this. We need to find out, and we need to compare ourselves with the best in the world and see where they are. I believe if we do that, we're likely going to succeed even more. We're going to move even much higher in the scale.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ango. Coming back here to the studio, Mrs. Toyin Bashir. Mr. David talked about ease of having visa from people coming to invest in Nigeria. I would like to know if it is so on the other side. Is there any way for our business people to get a visa to go to another country and find out how to invest in those other countries or sell their produce there? What happens?
Well, currently there's no initiative around that. I do know that the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, they have been working very closely with both local and international investors to essentially improve that, linking up Nigerians with business communities outside the country and facilitating whether it's an exchange of services or products. But if I may also use this opportunity to speak around some of the questions that came in, particularly in relation to the courts, because this is one of the areas that I oversee directly. So one of the new innovations which was introduced as a result of these interventions on ease of doing business is something called the Small Claims Court. And the Small Claims Court was initiated in Lagos. This was the first state that actually set up this court. It's targeted at small businesses to ensure that businesses which have claims of up to 5 million and below can actually go to this court and make their claims and then get judgments within 60 days. This is actually novel because you had mentioned that how long does it take for you to actually, determine a case in court these days. We all know that it takes a significant amount of time, but with the Small Claims Court, we have again been working with the Honorable Chief Judge of Lagos State to monitor progress, and we've seen that in the year since the court was set up, about 650 claims have been lodged in the courts, out of which 530 they have received judgments within 60 days. This is new. This enables the small businesses to recover their money very quickly so that they can then put it back into growing their businesses. And just on the back of that, I'd like to speak about the subnational efforts. So there are efforts to ensure that every state is carried along. Since the establishment in Lagos State, Kano State has also set up the Small Claims Court. This happened January this year. Already they are recording such a large amount of judgments in the short amount of time that it has been established. But interestingly, Edo State is also in the process of setting up the Small Claims Court. Now this, as the professor mentioned, that it's not one of the states that's tracked by the Doing Business team, but this is one of the states in Nigeria. They've seen the success story in Lagos, and they want to replicate it in Edo State. So we're working with the Attorney General of Edo State to support them technically in the legal framework that will enable them to set up the small claims court, and this will happen in the next few months because they are actually very dedicated towards this process. And lastly, on starting a business, I just wanted to mention again, this is an area in which I supervise directly, working very closely, of course, with the acting registrar of the Corporate Affairs Commission. There's been so many interventions targeted and just making it easy for anybody to visit the website of the CAC and register their companies. Prior to the interventions, only accredited agents could actually register companies for Nigerians. Accredited agents being lawyers and chartered accountants who are accredited with the Corporate Affairs Commission. But now all they have to do is visit the website, create a general user profile, that is, just any profile that you create on a website, and put in your details. There's a form there that enables them to just basically fill in who's going to be the director, the shareholder, how much is your share capital, where's your address. Once you finish that, complete that, sign that, and submit that, the signed versions, they can get their certificates in 24 hours. No intervention required, no lawyers required, no additional costs. So I guess speaking to the issue of carrying Nigerians along, there are efforts to communicate these reforms across all levels. Some states have taken this directly, but I know that the federal government is making efforts on a wide scale to ensure that everybody knows, because until they know, they can actually use it. But more and more, we're monitoring the statistics as much as we can. We're monitoring it through of course, the MDAs, where this, as David mentioned, is situated in the MDAs. So they continue to share statistics. So we've seen the upsurge in people registering their businesses by themselves. And these are small businesses, because these interventions are targeted at making it easier for those small businesses to actually grow the economy. So I thought that may be useful.
No,
Yeah.
very, very, very interesting, actually. I was going to ask you to speak to those questions, after I had put it to Professor Ango, but you did a good job of it. But let me also remain with you for a while. The previous administration in this country, started economic zones, which is also part of the process of trying to ensure that we bring about ease of doing business, especially when that has to do with in foreign investors that we expect to come and invest in Nigeria. Yeah. Of course, we lost them way back in the late 80s and early 90s, right? So what impact has that made presently in terms of what we're doing? What are you doing at the moment to ensure that impacts in what we're doing?
Okay. Again, we must also clarify that PEBEC actually focusing on targeted interventions. Currently, one of the interventions is not around the economic zones. But I am aware that the Honorable Minister of Industry, Trade and Investments is taking steps to actually establish a framework for improving that process. But it's not one of the things that the PEBEC is focused on, because it's important that when these interventions are made, it's also important that it should be systemic. So what we're monitoring is how do this business actually start, and when they start, how do they survive? If you bring them into the legal framework of, being a formal entity, how do they survive? Which is some of the things that the professor and also David has spoken to in terms of access to credit, which is why our focus is in improving the legal framework where those small businesses can then access credit. And then how do they continue to survive, which also leads to some of the interventions we've done on legislation. So we've been working, also collaborating with the National Assembly to pass some laws that is focused on improving that. And one of which we've been working for some time on is the Companies and Allied Matters Act, review of the Companies and Allied Matters Act, that's the CAMA. This bill has been in the process for some time. We've been providing technical support. The Corporate Affairs Commission, of course, being their bill, they have been also working very hard to ensure that this is passed. This was passed recently by the National Assembly. But you see, one of the things that was introduced was a legal framework whereby companies that are in distress can actually be saved as opposed to liquidated, so introducing a solvency framework. So these are the interventions that we're actually focusing in the life cycle of a company, the establishment, how it continues to live, how it thrives, and then when it's in distress, how do we save it?
Okay, Mr. David, I'm coming to you now. Small, micro, and medium businesses are beneficiaries of most of these interventions, but they are also having challenges like infrastructure, corruption, bottlenecks. Madam has addressed the regulatory body, it has been addressed already, but how do they access this thing in the midst of infrastructural deficiency, corruption? How do they thrive in an environment like this?
Okay, I'm sure we are aware of the Economic and Recovery Growth Plan of the federal government, the ERGP. One of the major pillars is on infrastructural improvement. So, and we can attest to the fact that there's been a lot of intervention in terms of road network construction and improvements. The rails are also being upgraded and implemented. Electricity is power is a major area of focus. The professor mentioned the issue of connection and all that. So we've done a lot of work with NEC and the distribution companies to make sure that the connection process is seamless and faster. In fact, as at the World Bank report in 2017, it took about 196 days to connect users to the grid. But so far down the line, 2 years down the line, it takes about just under 30 days to do that now. So that's a huge, this is based on interventions that we've done. But the World Bank reports 94 days in Kano and 111 days, 12 days in Lagos, which is a significant drop from where we used to be. But even in practice, right now, based on interventions we've done with NEC, who is the regulator of the sector, and the DISCOs, they've been able to streamline their processes internally. So new premises can be connected, especially for maximum demand customers, can be connected to the grid within 30 days. So in addition to that, there's also the, of course, we've mentioned the tax payments, the fact that it's now easier for them to pay their taxes. And with that process, a lot of taxpayers have been brought into the tax net. The issue of compliance is usually not necessarily about not willing to comply. It's also about the ease of the process of compliance. So if you can sit in your office or at home and make your tax remittance and also file your returns, that makes it a lot more easier to be able to comply. I think several of these interventions have really impacted the small and medium scale businesses extensively.
Okay, thanks indeed. Uchawaleke, there is this concern about the fact that, yes, it may be easy to pay tax, but in terms of getting credit, to do business in Nigeria, the interest rate is high. And under that circumstance, it may be difficult to borrow money and put into a productive venture. What are your thoughts on this? Considering the council's impact so far, in the business environment.
Yes, I agree with you. Of course, you know that when we say interest cost is not just the cost of capital. It's also the cost of doing business, particularly from the point of view of financial institutions or the lenders. So part of why interest rates are high in Nigeria today is also the issue of infrastructure. The banks will have to factor in the cost of power, and so on, and they will tend to naturally push that to their customers. Which is why I'm happy that the central bank seems concerned about it. in their meeting of March, the MPC signaled, its intention to now pursue an accommodative monetary policy, and by implication, it means that we hope to see in the days ahead a further reduction in the MPR, the monetary policy rate, which is the anchor rate, for an economy. And if we get a lower MPR down the line, okay, even though I don't expect the MPC to do that today, by the time they finish their meeting, of course you would expect that that should also translate to lower lending costs by the commercial banks, and of course improve access to credit. So the central bank is concerned about it and is doing something about it. One of the things too the central bank is doing in that direction is, I'm sure you're aware of the plan to set up a national microfinance bank with branches in 774 local government areas, of the country. That will also improve access to credit, while at the same time also improving financial inclusion. You and I know that the microfinance bank we have in Nigeria today are concentrated in the cities. You don't find them in rural areas. So by setting up the National Microfinance Bank, one of the intentions is to ensure that the rural, population, get access to, access to credit. So access to credit is very important. And we cannot overemphasize this issue of infrastructure, because access to credit is also linked to infrastructure. I just talked about it. Cost of capital is high today because the banks too are battling with the cost of infrastructure. Permit me to say this. I'm a member of the transition committee, set up by the governor-elect, in Imo State. And that committee has subcommittees. The one on education, health, agriculture, SMEs, and so on. Now, all these committees made recommendations, and what became clear is that those recommendations cannot succeed except the one on the committee on infrastructure, succeed. So they are all hinged on infrastructure. You need adequate power supply. Okay, you need good roads and so on for even your plans in education sector, agri sector. Okay, to work. So, and that's why I'm also happy that this has been recognized. And listening to the Minister of Information this morning, I was happy when he said that the government, plans to consolidate on the efforts they are putting in place so far with regard to infrastructure, especially power. And if you also notice, the borrowings we have done recently have all been targeted to infrastructure. We've taken, issued Sukuk, four roads, and recently too, the government is seeking $1 billion for investment in hydropower. So if we take loans and invest in infrastructure as they're doing now, okay, a few years down the line, we'll see substantial improvement, in infrastructure, which will rub off positively on the ease of doing business.
Okay, now we go to Kaduna, where we have Professor Ango. Professor Ango, you have listened to Mrs. Bashir touch on very pertinent issues. They've also had Uche Owaleke as well as David Uzosike. Well, I would like you to speak to some of the issues that they raised, and I'd like you to also end with the issue of having access to credit, because it's very, very crucial for any business to survive. And what should be the role of the commercial banks? Uche did mention that the central bank is coming with an intervention. What should be the role of the commercial banks in this country in ensuring that we have a well-appreciable ease of doing business in the country?
Yes, like you rightly said, I've listened to the various discussions. I want to first start on the issue of interest rate. The fact that the banks charge high interest rate, and like Prof said, maybe partly because of the deficiency in infrastructure, I will want to say that it's more than that. I think, banks are there, they are in between the deficit units and the surplus units in the economy. Some have money in excess which they want to deposit, and then some are looking for money to invest. Now, basically, our high interest rate is a reflection of the state of our economy. Our economy is largely import dependent, and of course we all know that it's monoproduct. That is what is causing the high interest rate more than anything. The more we are able to retain our resources within our country rather than financing or providing just for other countries, the more will be our chance or our opportunity to have lower interest rate in the long run. And now, having said that, I want to also comment on the issue of the statement made about establishing a national microfinance bank with branches all over the country. All these things, you know, some of these projects, I'm sure there may be very good intention, but usually some of these projects, we just implement them and they don't give us the correct result. What I would suggest, especially with the commercial banks, is for the central bank to come in and give some guarantee to the commercial banks, just like they do for agri guarantee scheme of many years back, maybe sometime the export credit guarantee scheme. They should be able to give some kind of guarantees, especially for small scale and micro level entrepreneurs. You know, setting up branches of banks all over the country, proving, I mean, it's just may end up actually, I mean, setting up, I'm talking about microfinance banks all over the country, may end up not giving us all that we need. What we need is for the central bank to guarantee, to give some kind of guarantee to the loans that are granted to micro enterprises and small enterprises, of course based on certain conditions, just like they did for agriculture with the Anchor Borrower Scheme. That may help, rather than just going to establish branches of microfinance banks all over the country. In any case, what are the loans that microfinance banks give? 50,000 naira or less? I don't think that will make much impact. What we'll have is increased bureaucracy, you know, many branches all over, and after 5 years, 10 years, we'll now be winding up those branches and those banks. I don't think that would be the right thing to do.
Okay, still staying with you, Dr. Ango. The execution of executive orders rolled out by the Buhari administration is meant to address critical regulatory bottlenecks raised by stakeholders. So how would you assess these executive orders so far?
Well, it's a bit early, but I believe it's a step in the right direction. I think what we are doing with the ERGP itself, with the economic policy of the government, which all these are part of, I think we are moving in the right direction. I believe there is need for this special intervention, especially of the presidency, to ensure that certain areas where we have bottlenecks are removed. It is too early to assess what will be the outcome, but I believe ultimately, if all these are implemented, I hope it will not be talking about 146 or 145 out of 190. I believe we need to put ourselves in a condition whereby we target to be at a higher level, you know, in terms of ease of doing business. I believe this is a step in the right direction, but it's too early to assess the impact. I think it will take a little bit of time to know for sure what the impact will be.
Okay, thank you, Professor Ango. Let's return to Abuja, to Mrs. Bashir once more. Madam, are there any policies of government, especially entrepreneurship policies, that appear to be inhibiting the efforts that this council is making to ensure ease of doing business in Nigeria? Is there any? If there is, what should be done to tackle such policy, or rather to have a kind of roundtable discussion with the authorities concerned to see how it can enable you achieve your own target?
Well, none of those policies actually come to mind, but I think that what we are really focused on is ensuring that there's a synergy within the government in relation to this policy on ease of doing business. We have different regulators, if I may use, or MDAs or departments or agencies or regulators who are focused on different objectives, some with a view to, you know, raising funds for their operations, some just basically just regulatory. But I think what we have essentially tried to do is make all the MDAs understand that we're working towards a common cause, and that if we all understand that, when they do formulate these policies, it won't be at variance. And that's why sometimes some policies come up, their discussions, they're better refined. They come up with additional, sort of like addendums to those policies. But that is still work in progress because, government sits in different houses.
Are you enjoying interagency collaboration?
So yes, I would say yes. And I would say that the dividends have started to show. And I would use an example. Working with Corporate Affairs Commission and the Federal Inland Revenue Service, there's towards in relation to starting a business, to registering a business. Previously, people had to go to the CAC to do an aspect and then go to the FIRS stamp duties office to do another process. Now, the CAC and FIRS now realized that there was a need to collaborate, that there was absolutely no reason why they couldn't work together to ensure that the stakeholders, the people who use their services, are in a more convenient state. And this is why technology was introduced. The technology introduced enabled both agencies to speak to each other. And by doing so, Nigerians now only have to go to a CAC website to even get done what is actually in relation to FIRS. That's the stamp duties. Everything is done on one portal. They've realized this. So on the back of this, they've even introduced a new reform again based on this successful collaboration. Previously, companies had to go to the tax office to get what is called the tax identification number. Of course, you must have your tax identification number because once you're registered, there are certain taxes that become applicable. But now, they have created a system whereby when a company is registered, the details are transmitted through technology again immediately to a server for the FIRS, and that generates a tax identification number, and an email is immediately sent to the company conveying the tax identification number. People know, especially small businesses, this costs matter. Going to a tax office to go and submit documents, all that have been removed. So the idea is showing this, that collaborations actually work. Even the collaborations we've had with the National Assembly in relation to the passage of these laws, understanding that the executive can actually collaborate with the legislature, and once this is done, there are immense benefits to Nigerians. Ultimately, that is what all this is about, making it easier for Nigerians to do business in Nigeria, and then making the economy attractive to international investors to attract the needed foreign direct investments.
Thank you, Mrs. Toyin. We'll now come back to you, Professor Uche. Let's talk about the economic zones set up by the federal government. How has that facilitated ease of doing business in Nigeria? On a final note.
Well, again, that we are still returning to the issue of infrastructure. What studies have shown is that for economic zones to thrive, it's not just about incentives, because that's what people say, gives tax incentives, to companies, to come and set up. What drives economic zones is actually just infrastructure. Once you have a good infrastructure in place, the businesses naturally, will come there. I want to quickly mention the issue of one indicator that we have left out here, and that's, protection of minority rights. It's also an indicator, in the ease of doing business. And our regulatory bodies, particularly the Securities and Exchange Commission, is doing a lot, in that area to ensure that listed companies, comply with disclosure requirements and international financial reporting standards. There's also the issue of the National Tax Policy 2017, which I would recommend that we implement, what we have there, particularly with respect to multiplicity of taxes, because that is, a constraint, to the ease of doing business. Small and medium enterprises complain about multiple taxes, and in our tax policy, we have it there that there is need to to harmonize, these taxes, to facilitate ease of doing business.
All right, David, your final thoughts, going forward. You are the driver of the reform.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe I should use this opportunity to speak specifically about the executive order 1, which underpins what we've been doing. The executive order 1 was the first executive order that was signed by the administration, and it was to promote efficiency and transparency in the business environment. So far, we've had a very positive outcome. The directives were for agencies to be transparent in how they do business by publishing their services, the timeline, the cost, and the requirements, so that their service takers are way ahead of receiving service what they need to do. And then it also mandates them to have what we call a default approval. Just in case they don't meet their timeline, then the applicant has rights to take the request to the minister, supervising minister of the agencies, to issue within 14 days. And then we talked about collaboration. It also mandates the agencies to synergize in a one government directive, where it mandates the agencies to work together to deliver service to the public. And of course, it has 3 other sector-specific directives, like the entry experience of travelers at the airports and the port operations, and of course the CAC registration of businesses within 48 hours. So essentially, this order has been tracked and implemented over the last 2 years. It was issued in May 2017. So I can tell you that we, along with the head of service and the Servicom, track these agencies on a monthly basis. They submit reports to the head of service, to Servicom, and to the Secretariat. We analyze these reports, and then we then publish the ranking of these agencies and how they perform in terms of compliance with the executive order. So we have published reports that shows the public how the agencies stack up, and this has actually engendered healthy competition amongst the agencies to try to improve their performance based on that order. So this has really had a good impact.
All right, we would like to thank you for that. Jume, I think we have really come to a close here. We are actually concluding this very edition of Good Morning Nigeria, but not without appreciating guests who did justice to the second topic that we're handling this morning. Dr. Yushua Ango, Associate Professor of Business Entrepreneurship and Director Academic Planning, Kaduna State University. We'd like to thank you for being part of our show this morning. Thank you indeed.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right, Mrs. Tony Bashir, Head Legal Cluster, Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC. You see, you have done well, right?
Thank you so much.
We hope to see better PEBEC in 2019. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
David Uzosike, it's been a pleasure talking to you this morning. You're leading the reform team of the council. Thank you for coming. And Uche Owaleke. Uche is a professor of capital markets and also chief economist, securities and exchange commission. Uche, thank you for your wonderful thoughts on this.